Hey, everybody, thank you for tuning in to our virtual Bible study for this evening. I'm glad you've tuned in. I hope you're enjoying the study, and I'm excited to dive right in. I wanted to do a couple of preliminary things before we get to our lesson tonight. First of all, this is lesson number 6, and I've been reading over my notes and trying to abbreviate and shorten, and I'm not exactly sure we're going to end up getting all of lesson number 6 on one lesson. In fact, I know we're not going to end up doing that, so please be on the lookout for part 2 of lesson number 6, which we will upload next week. So if you're watching it live or when it's first dropped, it'll be 7 p.m. next week. Or if you find it after, please go to the video playlist and look for lesson 6B. I'll try to label them so they're easier to find that way. So thank you for your interest in that, and I'm trying my best to keep these lessons compacted and condensed, so that's, I don't want it to be just drawn out and it become, you sort of get lost along the way. We don't want that. But we're covering really important stuff, and I don't want to rush at the same time. So I hope you understand that. Some lessons will be shorter and some lessons will be longer. And since tonight, lesson number 6 begins our introduction of the arguments for the existence of God, I sure don't want to rush through that. A lot of this, really everything we've done to this point has been foundational. We've talked about why it's important and why we need to have common sense and logic when we argue for things like this, especially existence of God, and what kind of proof are we looking at. And I know some people are shocked. They're like, "Wait a minute, you're not primarily going to use the Bible?" And I'm an advocate for the Bible. I believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God. I believe it's I live every day of my life according to the Bible. However, we said at the beginning, we don't want to be guilty of circular reasoning. I don't want to fall into this trap of saying, and I don't think you want to do the same, of arguing God exists. Well, how do you know that? Well, because the Bible says so. Well, how do you know the Bible's from God? Because He says it was. Well, how do you know that? Because God exists. And we just do this big circle. In Romans 1:20, which is a verse I hope in weeks to come that we'll sort of diagram that out and take a look at it. It very plainly says that God's existence is known from nature, right? So it's sort of not a special revelation, but just the generic scientific revelation of God. It's what people can see in the universe. The invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that people are without excuse. And what that tells us is that we can look out in nature and we can derive from the evidences and the arguments that are presented in nature. That's what we're going to start doing tonight. That God exists, that there's something beyond this universe that's not part of this universe, someone who transcends time and space and all of that. And we can even tell something about His nature. If there's power in the universe, He must have been all-powerful to create the world. If there's time in the universe, He must be eternal since He exists outside of that. So that's kind of where we're going. So I hope you're interested in these argumentation. Oh, I do want to say really quickly, if you haven't done so, I'm just going to make it real fast. If you're on YouTube, please, you can share the video from YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. Most of all, and subscribe so that you never miss content. We don't want you to miss out on content. Although we archive it, it would help us. We really want to boost the views on YouTube. We're not after money. We're not monetized. We just want people to see it and consider it. Also the same on Facebook. If you'll share this on your timeline, that would help us out a great deal. So let's get started with lesson number 6, part 1, or part A of lesson number 6. I want to begin with this. And I don't want to backtrack too much and do foundational, fundamental stuff too much, but I do want to start here. there is never conflict in truth. Do you agree with that? There's never conflict in truth. So if you're taking historical truth and you're looking at spiritual truth, there's never going to be conflict in either of those because truth is truth. If you're examining or contemplating philosophical truth or scientific truth, there's never going to be a conflict between philosophical truth and scientific truth. But because truth is truth, it all harmonizes. We believe that all truth comes from the same source. Now, I understand that that presents problems from people who go into a field of study. For example, if you go into the field of anthropology and you assume that all the arguments within anthropology are just true, it's what your peers say, it's what your idols in, if you look up to people and you say, these are people I absolutely adore, these are my heroes in anthropology, and you just adopt their argumentation and you do so with bias. This is what I'm going to believe. And you start really studying and you start looking at anthropological claims and you start setting that against evidences from science and maybe philosophical truth, and you look at it carefully, it might present a conflict because there may be a conflict in what you have assumed to be true and what is actually the case. There seems to be controversy. Truth never does that. Truth never contradicts itself. It does not do that. That's the nature of truth. It has a singular source and it's not contradictory. Let me give you an example of this, and you can do some reading on this. In his lectures and in his writings, it became clear as time went on that Albert Einstein became increasingly frustrated with some of the implications of the theory of general relativity because it resulted in the universe having a fixed beginning, right? There was sort of an implication within that field of study, and it meant the universe was not self-existent. And he wrestled with that. All right, neither good or bad. I'm just saying he wrestled with that because there's inherent conflict in assuming that the universe has just always been, and in what the actual evidence for the universe suggests. That's all coming up. We're going to be dealing with thermodynamics and all that coming up. And I'm not sure we'll get to it tonight, but that is part of this lesson. It is coming up. In 1919, there was a British cosmologist by the name of Arthur Eddington. And he discovered through an experiment with a solar eclipse that the theory of general relativity was true in the sense that the universe had a definite fixed beginning. And he was bothered by that. And he wrote, philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant to me, right? He just thought it was repugnant to believe that the universe had a beginning because there's an implication from that. If there's a fixed beginning to the universe, if that's when it began, if there was nothing before that, then you have to ask the question, how did the universe get here? What caused that? And that's what we're going to be dealing with tonight. And then he followed that up by saying, I should like to find a genuine loophole. And he's not the only person who's ever thought that way about, I'm looking for a loophole in the implications of this. Now, so as we begin this part of our study in lesson number 6, we're exploring that big jaw-breaking word again, metaphysics. I know we don't talk like that often, but we're talking about, beginning now, metaphysical deductions that prove God's existence. All of these proofs, beginning with cosmology, when we're talking about cause and effect, which is essentially what we're talking about tonight, and next week too, the continuation of it. I understand that these are contested arguments by people who don't believe in the existence of God. They would say this is not a valid argument. It's not a valid way of thinking. We hope to prove that it is as we go through. Ultimately, all of these metaphysical deductions come down to a choice of either the universe began by the purposeful act of a pre existent personal beginning, or the universe has always existed, but this non living universe all of a sudden gave life to itself through some sort of a accidental, impersonal means. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And that applies to everything. That applies to the answers we have with cause and effect. It applies to design in the universe. It applies to the issue of morality. It applies to the issue of meaning and purpose of life. Either we have a personal beginning that explains the universe and thus explains cause and effect and design and morality and meaning, or we have an impersonal beginning and there's no explanation for any of these questions that we have. So let's tonight begin with, and I'm going to throw out another jaw-breaking word. It's not, we don't normally talk this way, but in terms of the debate over the existence of God, we're going to be talking about cosmology, which is the study and the origin of the origin and structure of the universe. Essentially, we're asking, how did the universe come to be? What is the explanation? What's the most reasonable explanation for the beginning of the universe? And so it's a breakdown of, or a combination of two words, cosmos, which is the term world or universe, and then the term ology, the phrase ology that's added to that, so it means the study of. So philosophically, cosmology is a study of, or is primarily concerned with the origin of the universe. How did the universe come to be? And when we apply this in the debate over the existence of God, we're examining the relationship between cause and effect, ultimately making deductions from the effect about the cause. What caused that? What caused that? And we're moving backward until we find ourselves at the cause of all things. So the principal question is, what caused the world? What caused this universe? Now, I'm trying to be very fair in this. I'm trying to, as we go through, and state that when we ask that question, that is not without objection. We've done that with several things already, but especially moving forward with evidence. I'm going to be upfront and say, not everybody agrees with that line of questioning. There are a lot of people who say that's an invalid way to approach our understanding of the universe. There was a fellow by the name of Bertrand Russell who lived some time back, and I want to read something from Russell and what he thought about the line of questioning about the cause of the universe. And here's what he said, quote, "I see no reason whatsoever to suppose that the total universe," and he's talking about the universe. When he says the total here, he's talking in context about the universe, "that the total had any cause whatsoever." The universe is uncaused. It's always been here. That's what he believed. "The concept of cause is not applicable to the total." Again, he's talking about the universe. "I should say that the universe is just there, and that's all. That's all I have to know is it's just here. I don't want to seem arrogant, but it does seem to me that I can conceive things you say the human mind can't conceive. As for things not having a cause, the physicists assure us that individual quantum transitions in atoms have no cause." Here is my objection to his line of argumentation. He's saying I can just believe some things are there, and I don't have to know the cause. I just think they've always been. And he doesn't quote, but he makes a reference to physicists about quantum transition in atoms, and he says there's no cause for that. There's a bigger question there. Where did those atoms come from? How did the atoms get there? And I'm sure he would divert back to his original answer and say it's just part of the universe, it's always been there. But he never did explain the existence of atoms. Never did do that. What caused atoms? What caused anything in this universe? That is both a legitimate philosophical and a legitimate scientific question, right? Those are questions that we should explore and that we want answers to. Now, let's reintroduce at this point, an argument that we observed briefly in the last lesson, and we went over it real hurriedly. We didn't spend a lot of time on logic and how arguments work. Um, but we did sort of go over this idea that the argument of everything had a cause, right? So we fit that into sort of a prepositional type of thing, where we would say everything that has a beginning has a cause, right? So if it has a beginning point, it has a cause. The universe had a beginning point. We're getting to that. Just hang with me. Don't cut me off right here and then post me on another series and say, see, he doesn't have evidence for that. Hang on. Just listen to what I'm going to say. The logical consequence of that would be, therefore, the universe had a cause. All right. So breaking that down, someone has offered an expanded form of that argument that goes something like this: everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in the external cause of that. If something beyond itself created that. If the universe has an explanation of its own existence, the explanation is God. And again, hang on, because we're getting to all of this. The universe exists. Therefore, the universe has an explanation of its existence, and therefore the explanation of the universe is God. The existence is God. God is the cause of that. Now, I want to break this down because I think there needs to be some qualifiers on this. There are some, and not some, really just one. There are things categorically that exist by necessity. Then there are categorically things that exist because they are caused things. And we have to make this difference because, and I want to be fair, there are people who object to this line of questioning because they say, if you say that about the universe, you equally have to say that about God. What caused God? Okay? When I categorically separate these things, I'm saying there are things that exist by necessity because it's impossible for them not to exist. God being that. God is eternal. He exists beyond time and space, and so God is uncaused. He has always been. That may be tough to understand, but it doesn't make it untrue. Simply because something is hard to understand, it doesn't make it untrue. And we're going to show through this lesson, it's implied by the beginning of the universe that some personal beginning beyond it caused the universe. Which leads us to the second category, which is cause things. These things exist contingently. They depend upon something else for its existence. Something produced these things. Now, again, I want to be fair because I just said there are people who would object to that line of questioning. Who made the universe? Because then somebody would say, well, then you have to equally apply that to God. Who made God? So it's on the other side of my library, but I've got quite a few works of philosophy and books written by atheists. I like to read. I'm not averse to reading things that even oppose what I believe because I want to know where people are coming from. Sometimes generically we state that. I know that the individual atheists have their own unique reasons for doing what they do, but there's a book. It's on, you can't see it's on this side of my library. The book is entitled An Introduction to Philosophical Analysis, and I've got the second edition of that. It's printed in 1967. I know it's old, but the argument itself, right, is valid in the sense of what we're doing right now, but because it's still the same thing being presented by atheists today. I think it is. So there's a guy by the name of Professor Johns Hospers, and he says this: the casual argument is not merely invalid, but self-contradictory to the conclusion. Now, he's talking about this question, who made the universe? Cause and effect. He's calling in question cause and effect, which says that something, God, he said parenthetically, does not have a cause, contradicts the premise, which says that everything does have a cause. Right? So he's saying, if we're arguing that everything has a cause, when we're looking at effects, he's saying then you ought to also say that about God because God is an effect and has a cause. If that premise is true, the conclusion cannot be true, and if the conclusion is true, the premise cannot be. Many people do not at once see this because they use the argument to get to God, and then having arrived where they want to go, they forget all about the argument. If the argument contradicts its own premise, we have the most damning indictment of an argument that one could possibly have, that it is self-contradictory, right? So he's saying, you've got to ask the same question about God, and if you can't do that, then it's not a valid line of questioning. I'm not going to read this other quote. I do want to make reference to it. There was a fellow who wrote a book entitled "The Necessity of Atheism." His name is David M. Brooks, and it's essentially the same. I've just got a lot of quotes in my notes because I like to read. I like to know where people are coming from. But he's saying you can't ask that question of the universe without also asking it of God, even though we're saying it is categorically not a question that can be applied to God. It's like saying, what does red smell like? I can say, what's that color? Because categorically that's the right question to ask. But I can't say of red, what's the color purple smell like? What does the color black smell like? It's categorically the wrong question to ask. And we're suggesting that's how that works with God. He's in a different category. He's an uncaused thing, so you can't ask the question of cause to an uncaused thing. But we're going to let the universe speak to its beginning. All right, so just hold on. We're getting to it. We're going to see in a moment that the assumption that the universe always existed is philosophically and scientifically untrue. It's not true. The universe has not always existed. It has a beginning point. There's actually a starting point to the world we live in now. And I know it's denied. I know people like to believe that the universe has just always been here because they like to suggest that if we're implying that there's a God, that the same question has to be applied to him. But I'm suggesting that some things exist by necessity. They're uncaused things. And we mean God exists by the necessity of his own nature. It's impossible for God not to exist. Now, whether you agree with me or not, I know there are some listening who don't agree with that. The universe has a beginning point, a fixed point of origin. And if the universe exists contingently, if it depends upon something for its existence, then that existence is explained by something before or beyond the universe. Beyond time, before time and space, beyond time and space. So if that first cause is before time and before space and beyond time and space, then that first cause is timeless and eternal. There's an implication from the beginning of the universe about God. God has no beginning. Therefore, God has no maker. And so the question of who caused God is not categorically a valid question to apply to him. Although we find it's interesting when people would ask the question, well, who made God? Do you really want the answer to that? Is that what you... Now, there is no answer to it, but if you're suggesting that could be answered, the implication would be someone greater than God. Now, it's not true, but the implication would be still somebody that transcends time and space. And so you're still back to the same premise of something beyond the universe, a personal beginning that transcends time and space. All right, let me look at our time. I don't want to get too far into these arguments I don't want to stop and have to and leave everybody hanging. I want to try to watch our time. And I'm sorry, I think I mentioned last week, I have a ton of notes, and it's hard sometimes to know what to include and what not to include. And we get to a lot of these things in our live class on Wednesday evenings. We have a lot more time for discussion than I have sometimes in the videos, but bear with me. We're doing the best we can. Okay, so let's go here. Here's the first thing, and we're going to add to it next week. I promise. You're going to want to get both lessons before you make and draw your conclusions. There are things that are uncaused. That'd be God. But there are things that are caused. That's the universe. Okay? Here are the options for the universe. You have two options for the universe. The universe is either non-contingent or it is contingent. There's no middle ground. There's no other option. Either the universe is contingent upon something for its existence, or it owes its existence to nothing. Right? It doesn't depend on anything for its existence. It's always been here. It's eternal. It's timeless. Or it's not. Those are the two options. There are no other options for the universe. So it is either non-contingent, meaning that it is eternal, it is independent, it's on its own, or it is contingent. It depends on a cause that is beyond the universe itself. It is not eternal. It is limited. It is finite. And we're going to let the universe itself speak to whatever is the truth of those things. So we're compelled to ask honest questions in light of those two options about the possibilities and the explanations for the origin of the universe. Did everything come from nothing? That's option one. Or did everything come from non-life? Right? So there was just zero. There wasn't even matter. Or there was matter. There was non-living matter that all of a sudden gave rise to life. Or option number three, did the universe have a personal beginning? Did someone make all things? Now, if you're breaking it down between contingent and non-contingent, those are the only three options. Did everything come from nothing? I don't think very many people would say that. And I'm saying theists and atheists both. I could be wrong. There might be exceptions to that, but in what I've read, I don't think even there are many atheists or infidels or skeptics, whatever fits within the category of non-belief in God. I don't think there are many within that category who would say there was just totally, absolutely, 100% nothing. Right. So the belief is that the universe that matter is eternal. It's just always been here, and whatever the theory is so there's even debate with theories of origin that it sort of sprang into life and it gave rise to the universe. So option number two is, did life come from non-life? Is matter eternal? Or option number three, did the universe have a personal beginning? Did someone make all things? Now, looking at the time real quick, we're always real close to time. Let's do this. Let's talk about number one, and then let's save the remainder of that discussion for next week, because I'm excited about the follow-up to all of this. And I'm looking through my notes, and I'm going to have to, we always run out of time. Never enough time to talk about these things. And I have to kind of watch the amount of time for the videos, because we try to keep it to within like a 30-minute class, because it is a class after all. This is what we're doing. This is class, and it's an option for people who can't be here, and we're glad to have people watching who aren't part of North Hamilton at all. I think it's awesome that we can reason together. So we still try to honor that 30-minute window for class. So let's do this, and we'll save the rest for next week. So the first option: can something come from nothing? All right, so this would be like saying there is zero, absolutely nothing, and then you add zero to it. What total do you get? 0 plus 0 equals, well, the answer is nothing. If you have nothing and you add nothing, you get nothing, right? That's truth, right? So again, I'm going out on a limb by saying, at least in what I've read, I wish I could just pull hundreds of books off the shelf and say, here's what I've read. Not to brag, I'm just saying my understanding is that the consensus of atheists, there may be an exception to it, but most people would not say that everything came from nothing. They're going to posit eternality to matter and go from there. That would certainly go against the theory of evolution. And I know that this is not so much a class about evolution versus creationism, but we kind of get into that a little bit, because if you say there's nothing, you're removing matter from the equation. And I think atheism and evolutionary theory, they're companions in many ways. They depend upon matter for argumentation, at least from the standpoint of atheism. So question number one is out. So here's what it leaves us with. The only two viable options are, and we have to determine whether they're accurate options, right? The only two options are, one, that the universe is eternal. Matter is eternal. It's always been here, and non-living matter created life. Or option number three, the universe had a personal beginning. So I'm going to put a plug in it right here. And when we come back for the part 2 of this lesson, we're going to explore a couple of laws within science that tell us something about matter. They're called the laws of thermodynamics. You can go and research that, but study it out. Look at it. Laws of thermodynamics. What do the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of heat energy as it relates to matter, tell us? Tell us what that does, and we'll discuss that next week. What do those laws tell us about matter and energy, and why is that important to this discussion? All right, do some research. You'll see quickly why it is. And one is the law of one of them is the law of energy conservation, about what energy exists and whether we are creating brand new matter and energy in the world or just using what we have. And the other is the law of increasing entropy and why disorder and randomness bear on the answer to our question. Okay, we're going to put a peg in it here. Thank you for tuning in. I understand. These are not typical studies, and sometimes they're hard if we're not regularly involving ourselves in philosophical discussion. They're hard, but it's important discussion because it's about God. And we want to make sure that we're right with Him. All right, even if you don't believe that He exists, you surely believe it's a very important discussion to have, whether or not God is real. And if He is, then there's something obligatory about that. We're creation. We're the clay, and we're obligated to our potter. Okay. Pegging it here, I promise, this time for real. Be back with us next week where we finish this lesson, part 2 of this, lesson 6b coming up next week. And if you're able, we would love to have you in person. We want you to do that. We love in-person study. We get to discuss a lot more in class, but I hope you're benefiting from this too. And please be sure to go back in the archives and catch up where we are in our lessons as we now start lesson number 6, the arguments for the existence of God. Cosmology. This is the first part. See you next week. Until then, please know God loves you even more than I do, but I love you too. And I'm excited to see you next week and discuss these very important matters. See you then.